Pretty good. Okay, I guess we'll start with public comment. Are there any comments that people want to make? There's nobody online. I just want to, for those of us in the room, I want to introduce Mark Smuckler, who is a new town meeting member from Precinct 7, who has decided to join us tonight. So, welcome. Okay, administrative matters. Just a couple of things there. An update from the two subcommittees that we have, and this is just a very high level, but I'll speak for the subcommittee on the stakeholder input. We've had 3 meetings, I believe, at this point, running through the strategy, the process, the tactics, the science training, and those things. And we have a draft document in process with, which we will share with you at the next meeting. So that is in full swing. So that's the update from that group. Hey, Bill. Jess, you want to give an update on the other committee meeting?
Yeah, we will be meeting in 2 days to finalize what our recommendation will be for the next meeting. You know, we've started to separately brainstorm a lot of really great ideas. So I think ideas and a path forward will certainly not be an issue by any means. I think narrowing down will be the biggest task, but we'll have a lot of things for the group to react to.
Thank you. Okay, so next is the minutes. I went out of order a little bit. Sorry about that. I'm hoping everybody had a chance to review them. I did get one piece of feedback, and that is when we identified what the votes were. We had 8 people there, but apparently on the vote we reported 9, so that has been fixed. So the current version has the voting at 800, so that has been modified. So are there any other suggested modifications, changes, additions?
I think about the first meeting of the representative, I believe it's 72, although the legislative it was back in the second month. The actual meeting is 7.
Right. I think that we were just reflecting in the legislative things there, so that was correct. And Nikki has just arrived, so that's great. Thank you. Is there any other comments? Take a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second. Thank you, Bill. All in favor? Oh, wait a minute, hold on. I have to do this as a roll call because we have somebody online. Bill?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
Jess?
Yep.
Okay, so that is 700. Now, Pat, it's all yours.
This one? Yes, I'm happy to buy that and pass it along.
Okay.
It's okay. Thank you.
Let me just cross through. Or if you want to slideshow.
So, welcome everyone today.
Show your hand. Put you down there.
I won't be able to see the people on the computer, but please speak up. There we go. Tonight, we are going to talk a little bit about Wellington's town meeting This is an introduction, and let's see. What we hope to do tonight is, one, help the committee understand Burlington's town meeting. I'm curious how many people here are town meeting members. So for many of you, this is going to be old news. For some of you, you'll maybe learn a little bit more than you already. What we really hope to do today is acquaint you with the structural elements that will be included in the charter. And we'll talk about the things that might be included in the charter versus what might be included in the bylaws. Please, if you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll try to speak up. And furthermore, our discussions, we will not be making any decisions today, but we'll have a few discussions on whether modifications to the current practice are necessary in line with the mission, which is to provide all residents with a local government that is transparent, effective, efficient, and responsive, both for present day and future generations.
Hey, Pat, sorry to interrupt, but on the WebEx, y'all are still just sharing the agenda. You're not sharing the presentation.
Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. But I can hear you good, Pat, but I can't see your presentation.
Something else? Down the top, show something else. Sure.
There it is. Perfect.
Great. All right. So through. So with this background, with these goals and objectives in mind, the first thing I wanted to do is just give you, and I'm going to keep going back to this sample table of contents. We may not have an article 8, we may not have some of these articles in these numbers, but this is a good framework for you to start understanding what pieces we're talking about when we go through sections of a draft charter. So tonight we're going to be talking about the legislative branch of government, which is Article 2. And there's an element in the legislative branch regarding resident relief mechanisms, which involves voter petitions. So I've highlighted that as well. Just trying to keep you thinking about the charter framework, although we'll be discussing more than just the elements. The structure of the town meeting is some of the sources for the material that we're going through today. It begins with the special acts. That is contained in Chapter 686 of the Acts of 1970. And when you get this presentation posted, you'll have the link to what the town clerk has put together as Chapter 686, which is the special act along with all of the amendments put together into one document. I think at our last meeting, you saw that there were in the teens number of special acts that are amending their original legislative special act. And the town clerk keeps a tally of these, and what she has posted at the town meeting website is called Chapter 686, but that includes all of the amendments subsequent to Chapter 686. So that's a document I've listed here just for your reference.
Should we, is there an action there that everybody should read that at this point?
It's not very long, so that would be fantastic if everyone on the committee could take a look at it. It might help you synthesize things. The language, because it started, because the language was written back before 1970, and because there are amendments, it's not necessarily the most user-friendly language, but it might be helpful for you to kind of identify what part of our town meeting is included in a special act or a statute, and what part is reflected in the bylaws. I'm also including a link to the general bylaws where you can also find material about the special act. There's a section on there's a section on the legislative branch on town meeting. And also, I've included a link to Burlington's town meeting handbook. And it includes, it's rather long, but it includes a good synthesis of what town meeting rules have been applied over time. It's not completely up to date, but it's a good place to look if you're looking for additional information to kind of flesh out what's going on in your town. So one of the questions that we'll want to talk about is what information are we including in the charter? This is an oversimplification, but what we're looking at is, does the provision establish a fundamental governance structure? Is it something basic framework? If so, you're going to want to include it in the charter. If not, does the provision just regulate procedural details that might require more frequent adjustments? If so, we're going to include it in the bylaw. And we will make, the Commons Center will make some recommendations of what material will go in a charter and what material will go in a bylaw. However, there are times that a committee may want to elevate a certain element into a charter rather than include it in a bylaw if it's something that's very important to them and they think it's pressing and it should be in place, indefinitely. But we'll have discussions as we go along. So this is an oversimplification, kind of outlining what's going to be in the charter versus in a bylaw. And why do we make this distinction? And that's generally because updating special acts and charters has a few more procedural steps than updating bylaws. So it can take a little bit more time. Charters are intended to last for a long time. However, you're virtually going through the same actions now as you would if you had a charter and bylaws, and that you have special acts that need to be updated through being approved by town meeting and going to the state legislature. In a charter situation, sometimes there's also a townwide vote involved. So in general, most charter amendments are going to go through the same special act legislative process. I have an asterisk there because there is some smaller changes can be brought through a section of the charter, which is infrequently used, but actually it's more complicated than going to the legislature, so it's not. However, an alternative, we talked about how charters can be made in the beginning. It can also be amended through an elected charter committee. And that is when a group of citizens petition to elect a charter committee. So there is an alternative way, but that's more of a grassroots effort to change a charter as opposed to something that's coming through your local government.
I have a question.
Yes.
So we have current special acts now. If we want to change it, we bring something to town meeting votes on it, and then it's submitted to the state legislature, and they approve it, and that's the end of it.
It's for most amendments, yes, that would be the
That's the end of it. For a charter, I'm trying to differentiate between the processes. For a charter, you go through that, the town meeting, state, and then you have to have a vote.
There's no legal requirement for a vote. However, for the introduction of a charter, there is almost always a vote written into the legislation, either by the town or by the legislature, because they want to make sure the town has five. For an amendment, if it's a smaller amendment, it generally is not going to require a vote, just like your special acts do not require a vote. If it's an overhaul of the whole charter, there may be a requirement.
So an ongoing management of the charter will be the same process as we have today for the ongoing management of our special acts. That's different than what I thought. So And it's really no more complicated than what we have now.
not to change it. If there were significant changes, then the legislature or the town may choose to submit it to the voters to make sure there's buy-in if there's going to be a major change. But most of the smaller changes, aren't necessarily going to go through a vote process, but they can. It's not a requirement, but it is often done anyway.
And
So-
does the townwide vote that comes after the state legislature?
Correct. Because when you go to a state legislature, either with a charter or a special act, there's a few paths. In some situations, the legislature may make changes to the wording that you use. So it's not going to go for a vote until the legislature has hammered out the exact wording and language. So the vote would come after the legislation has been passed and signed by the governor.
Legislation makes changes, does town meeting have to approve?
Usually there is a provision in the original vote at town meeting that certain changes can be approved by the select board or whomever is putting it through. And the select board can make the, generally large changes. There's a process where you can choose to allow changes, whether you can choose to have the legislature thumbs up or thumbs down, about a little. Correct. Any other questions before we talk about updating bylaws? So updating bylaws is a little different in that there's approval by town meeting and review by the Attorney General's office. So there is a process, and however, because the legislature isn't involved, it might take a little bit less time, and it's done more frequently. Burlington reviews and updates bylaws all the time. So it's very similar to the process. It's the same process if you would update your bylaws now. So that explains a little bit about why we want to put things in charters that are fundamental and leave the details and procedures to the bylaws. Any questions before I move on?
You mentioned as a third document that's up on the website, the handbook for town meeting. I assume that contains all the procedures that are not degree of bylaws nor a degree of charter. They're much more parochial to just how town meeting functions. I assume that doesn't have a process for them. It's not part of it. It's just entering.
It is not, yeah, exactly. Mr. Myers can talk about it even more, but that is a town meeting vote. And so that is, in general, not something that this committee is going to get into that level of detail. However, it can come up and we can talk about it. We may make the committee may make a recommendation saying, let's look at this rule if that comes down to the issue of what people are interested, what problems people are interested in solving.
The old bylaws, they use the rules and regulations, which don't necessarily call for procedure.
Correct.
Jack, you're the tougher one to hear.
Sorry about that. I was saying, below the bylaws, there are rules and regulations which do not necessarily require a town meeting vote. The board or commission may adopt their own rules and regulations that operate within the bylaw.
And the operational rules.
Correct. Although the bylaws may establish some guardrails for what you can include in your individual procedures and goals.
Rules and regs can't override. Right.
Correct.
They have to operate within the scope of the bylaw.
Exactly. And as we go through, and I think you'll understand this, the bylaws do not override the charter. So,
It's hierarchy.
there's definitely hierarchy.
Okay.
The first, we're going to talk a little bit about the basics, dates, and frequency of town meeting. And so Mass General Law requires at least one annual town meeting per year of towns. And it has to be held between February and May. It can be postponed, but it has to be completed by June 30th, which is also not coincidentally the end of the fiscal year. Additional unscheduled special town meetings may be called as frequently as necessary under state law. Generally, it's the select board that calls special town meetings, but voters may also petition to hold a special town meeting outside of the regularly scheduled town meetings. In Burlington, special town meetings are called if petitioned by 200 voters or upon request of the select board, town moderator, or 10 or more town meeting members. However, special town meetings are pretty rare in Burlington because you already have 3 meetings per year. So most business can be taken care of during those 3 meetings.
We have called special town meetings to be held within one of those.
And that is frequently done, having them called on the same date. And it's usually about a matter that has to get on the warrant at a certain time.
I have a comment maybe to throw in the parking lot of future.
Yep.
If the particular wording wherever it currently lives mentions a flat number of 200 voters, maybe you want to consider making that express percentage value of the last census of residents. So that way it's not a number that's constantly changing.
So the 200 voters is a state law requirement.
Never mind then.
And it's 100 voters for, I think it's for 5%, which whatever is lesser. So the state has expressed an interest in 200 being the floor.
That's 2% or 5%, whichever is.
No, it's 200 or 5%, whatever is less,
Got it.
which would in Burlington definitely be the 200.
Yeah.
So, and let me add the caveat that when a charter is created and it's a special law, you can put something in a charter that might disagree with what the general law says. And, you know, you'll read a lot of charters where things have been slipped in that disagree with what the state law says. However, it makes it more unlikely that the legislature is going to be happy with that charter and pass it on. So in general, to the extent that we can keep numbers as required by state law and not introduce anything that the legislature is not going to be familiar with, that helps in the process of getting a charter.
But I now have an official page in my number called parking lot, so we're good to go. Just waiting for contributions.
So Burlington has rather unusual language in its special act. It says Burlington's town meeting is a continuous body that may adjourn for periods not exceeding 150 days. So essentially, all 3 of your meetings are considered one meeting with periods of adjournment in between. Why is this? Well, first, the general bylaws provide those. So the special act says that you have a continuous town meeting that can adjourn for periods not exceeding 150 days, which is essentially requiring at least 3 meetings a year. Your bylaws actually flesh out when those meetings have to be done, have to be called. So that's a little bit of a difference between what the special act bylaws include. So, and your meetings are in May, September, and January. So why is this called a continuous town meeting? Likely, the way this is worded has changed over time, but at the time, it's probably called a continuous because there's some procedural differences between a regular town meeting and a special town meeting. So what the language is trying to say is all 3 of these are to be treated like the regular annual town meeting. That means in a minute. Let me go back to the finish of this slide first. In practice, as many of you know, we're at town meeting. May is reserved primarily for the budget and financial articles. September focuses on zoning and general bylaws. And January is intended to kind of address mid-year financial issues for the most part. Yes.
I was gonna say, that used to be when I first started town meeting, absolutely the way it happened. If it wasn't financial, you didn't talk about it in May. That is less the case today. I think it's, May is, the intention is that that's the time when we have to talk about financial stuff because of budget cycle. But we're not precluded from talking about other things, which I think in the past, it was, don't come to May town meeting if it's not a financial article. But sometimes there's something that needs to happen that is a timely thing so that coming to it in May, I'm making Mr. Byer, I'm not, Tom probably, but, you know, if there's a time sensitive issue, you can bring it to May. So there's no, at least in my experience, over the past couple of years, it's been not, you know, if something happens, you want to bring it into May town meeting, or you want to talk about a financial thing in September or whatever it is, realizing that you've got a fiscal year issue, but if there's something that comes up, that you can. And I remember in COVID, we did delay a lot of stuff till September that were financial. And so I just want to make sure that it's not a hard and fast rule. This is not, when you read this, it feels more structured than I believe it is. And maybe the intent is to try to focus some of that stuff, but it's not to exclude other things. I guess that's sort of a way of saying what I just said in a lot of words.
Anything can come up and be pointed to the wall on any of the three.
Exactly.
There's no limits to it. It's just been a kind of a trend of sorts. Some people thought that zoning was getting short shrift in the town meeting because it's always at the end. So to include that issue, so zoning is pushed to September where it can be the start of the show. It's necessarily reason.
So I'm just saying, since we look at the slide, we may want to modify that a little bit before it gets posted for all the same.
Well, yes, and so there's often overlap between topics. And this is because, you know, the state may require you to pass something by a certain date and it needs to be inserted in that area.
Right.
Okay, as I started saying, why is it a continuous town meeting? It's likely so they're all treated as annual town meeting with the same procedural rules. For example, it only takes 10 residents to put an item on the agenda for an annual town meeting, but 100 signatures are required for a special town meeting and 200 to call a special town. So, you know, the language is historical, calling it 150-day adjournments with one meeting. I think it might be simplified, and we'll talk about this if we do a draft of a charter language. We may try to make it simple and say there's 3 meetings that are treated like annual meetings. If you decide to keep 3, the language will be a little different, but it'll be the same. I wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of what some other towns are doing with respect to town meeting. Now, keep in mind, all of these towns still have additional special town meetings. Some of them, like Milton, for example, has 1 scheduled annual meeting, and additional business is done by special meetings. Of the comparative towns, and pretty much all the towns I can think of, Burlington may be the only one that has 3 scheduled meetings. May, September, and January. Several have 2. Many, you know, there's a movement towards having at least 2 meetings treated as annual town meetings, usually held in the spring and the fall. They're sometimes, they're called by different names, spring and fall, annual and subsequent, annual and a scheduled special. So just to give you an idea where Burlington's at. I also put in this slide, just for your information, some numbers on the members in this small group. There are definitely other representative town meetings that have fewer members than Burlington, but in this group of 6 towns that we picked, it's on the smaller side, but right in there in the range.
And Betsy, maybe this is for the parking lot. I would be really interested to know how attendance is impacted, or if attendance is impacted by the size of the body. If there's 250 people, but only half of them are showing up, that it would just be interesting for me to know that if we could have that information out there.
Yeah, and I don't think we have any, I have a little bit of statistical information further on in the slideshow. I don't think we have a lot of, we can take a look. I don't think there's ever been a study of how it's impacted by the numbers. I guess what we like to look at and what we'll show you later on in this is how many people are running for these positions. That's an important, that's definitely an important statistic. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
I'm gonna underline what Nikki said. I think it's important that how many people run is getting at a different issue than how many people show up. And
Right.
so we'll put that on there and maybe
Absolutely.
you guys can.
If you have a comparison, attendance also will be influenced by both attendance versus overall. So that can make a difference.
And there are a number of things that impact it. You'll also see things fall off depending on how many meetings you have per meeting,
Session.
per session. How many regularly scheduled meetings you have in a year, et cetera. So there are a number of factors. We may be able to get a little more information on that.
Are we the town of Massachusetts that was?
I'm not going to say you're the only one that I know of. And you're the only one that I have rescheduled. And, my colleagues, I've asked around a little bit and we haven't found any yet. So that doesn't mean there aren't some because there's no study out there that says how many there are. Generally, the spring annual one is reported, but there's, we could call the other towns and find out, but we don't know right now. Of all the ones we've surveyed, I don't know of any numbers.
Could you repeat the question for the audio?
Oh, this question?
My question was if we were the only town in Massachusetts that will reschedule town meetings. And I guess, maybe a deep storage parking lot. But then I'm curious to know if frequency of the meetings correlates to how busy the town would be. And if, how frequent anybody, if the shift to a city form of government occurs because of the frequency of business happening. And if we're on a precipice where we consistently have 3 meetings a year, are we teetering on that? And again, I'm not saying we should just jump the city, stop by attention.
I think we should probably not have that discussion and we should put it in the parking lot.
That's what I'm saying.
Before you,
Yeah.
yes, get something prepared.
We have no problem.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think, let's just move on.
So, something that's not necessarily reflected in that original document, something I've learned is that in January town meeting approved pursuing a change by special act to allow a certain number of members routine participate electronically. The bylaws will have to be revised. Apparently, before this, the bylaws were passed for having a third, but until a special act changes how many people can participate electronically, that is not.
I need to correct what you said.
Oh, well, please do.
The bylaw was passed with that 15.
Oh, there was a new bylaw passed along with this.
The bylaw that was passed, the 1/3 was amended to 15.
Thank you.
And that is what was passed. Unfortunately, what shows up in the minutes of the town meeting is the 1/3 that is yet to be corrected, although it has been pointed out.
I do recall you saying that, so thank you, because I was looking back to the document again. So, which is why I didn't put it on this slide, because I knew there was something like that going on.
That's
But,
what
so,
So as of right now, we can have 15 people remote, but that is in addition to the ADA required remote participation.
That is not been approved by the HG, so we can have it.
right, it hasn't gone to the as we talked about, all the bylaws have to be
Right,
approved by the
I
AG.
thought it's all but one or two were, my understanding was everything but 2 articles got approved.
I heard that it was approved. Maybe I have next question.
Okay.
It may be that they're waiting for the results of the special act. I'm not sure. So that is something that can. But in any event, I don't believe it's in effect yet. Maybe it'll be in effect by September, I'm not sure.
Because a special act has to go not to the AG, but to the legislature, right? Okay, so the AG approves some stuff, but that would have been this, that would have been the bylaws. Okay.
The AG will approve. You file. The legislature will review this and not.
And the AG may have decided that bylaws, that the special act is required before they could approve bylaw. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Okay. And what? Oh,
I was gonna say, I think we should probably get some clarity on where we sit on that so that we're not guessing. So,
and we can talk, well, at the end, we'll talk about whether you want to invite some people in to answer some of these questions. And that may be a good question. I wanted to stop for a minute and have some discussion points so that we can talk about what we make sure that, everyone's had a chance to weigh in on some of these issues. The first thing, there are some challenges and there are benefits of the 3 meeting schedule. And these are just some that I've put up here and may not necessarily be Burlington's experience. The benefits of the 3 meeting schedule that you have, the frequency allows a quick response. And one of the, one difficulty about town meeting or one comment is that there are concerns about how can you act quickly when you need to respond. If there's an offer to sell some land to the town, how do you act quickly? And having 3 scheduled meetings a year definitely helps respond more quickly to opportunities. A regular schedule allows staff, officials, and the town meeting members to plan their schedules around these meetings. It's helpful. If you're going to have that much business, having a regular schedule is really helpful. Each meeting can focus on, and as you said, not exclusively, but focus on a category of warrant articles to make sure that everyone really understands what's coming at what time. Some of the downside is there's less time in between to prepare for meetings. You're finishing up one meeting and it's time to start getting ready for the next meeting. And it may be a heavier commitment for elected town meetings to have 3 meetings. However, if you have that much business, they're going to, whether it's a special or not, it still might be the same amount of time. I think, but I would really love to hear from you. We'll talk about some other things, but I'm interested if there are any thoughts or opinions about how 3 meeting schedule is working.
I would add that budget for it, so you don't have to transfer money around for specials. So you can budget for it.
Meetings allows some flexibility in financial articles. In September, you can no longer spend free cash, but you can still raise and appropriate. And January, you can't measure appropriately, but you can spend the weekend.
Certification.
I guess my, Bill, you're gonna have to speak up.
Oh, all right.
Okay, feels to me like that we have no difficulty filling up pre-meetings with important business of the town. And we, so much so that we go multiple nights for each town meeting session. And it's not like we're talking about stuff that doesn't matter or doesn't require debate or doesn't encourage town residents to come and participate as well. So it feels to me, and then you've got the response time, you know, when the ADU thing passed and said we had to have that done by February, we actually could go to town meeting with a proposal and have the town control how that was going to happen. We did it in January, so by the time February happened, we were ready to rock and roll, where a lot of towns were caught, you know, trying to schedule a special meeting, not being able to schedule it, et cetera. So my perspective is, I think, very successful. I think they're well run. I think, you know, there are tweaks we probably make, but I feel like 3 is right. So that's kind of how it.
I would be curious as to how many nights these other towns meet, even though they, I gather, 3 times a year.
Oh, I know, it was Saturday.
And some may be like Arlington that go for forever. Different cultures, different times.
And there have to be, you know, you're saying we're the only one that gets 3 specific town meetings a year. Every site has fewer, but how many nights or days or weekends that they actually gather?
And it's, as was stated, it's very different in different towns. I know in Reading, that's where I'm from, there is, you know, it's often 2 or 3 nights for each, sometimes 4, which sounds about like what's happening with your 3 meetings. And there's also special meetings that are held in addition to the 2. So just because there's only scheduled doesn't mean there aren't additional meetings at other times. And as Jack said earlier, sometimes the specials are held at the same time as the regular time.
Vicki, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think that part of the input gathering that we do should focus on best nights or best days and times for town meetings. I definitely have experienced and heard in the past that town meeting being in the evening is harder on certain people. And I've heard of other towns that do Saturday ones, right? And have childcare available, right? Wouldn't that be cool? The parents could go and, you know, their kids are taken care of. So I just think that might be a point of discussion when we get input from folks rather than just assuming we should continue doing it Monday, Wednesday, forever. And then I was also going to agree with you, Betsy, about, I think that 3 seems right, it feels right for us. I feel like the first question I had was if we decrease the number of town meetings we have, when would we ever get anything done? Like, the other meetings would be longer and we just wouldn't be moving along as quickly as we do now and as we could. So to me, 3 sounds right as well.
And just to add, some of the things I've heard from other towns that have representative town meetings, unlike Burlington, sometimes feel like the budget is passed in 15 minutes and nobody's really taking a look. So there's also can be some pressure when there's fewer meetings to pass things quickly. And so that does come up. It's very much a cultural issue of how much time people want to spend. Anyone else before we move on to the next section?
The only thing I'd add is my concern with going to less than 3 town meetings is also those them lasting longer. And as we have seen every single time, when you get to the third night or the fourth night, the attendance is small. And so I do think you risk that also with less town meetings. But I think what we do need to review is the 90-day time frame for some of the bylaw aspects, because I think that could help address some of the, will you go from one thing right into the other?
Thank you. Anyone?
I'm just gonna ask if we had an understanding of, since we, a potential notice coming from town meeting members, sounds like town meetings happen over multiple nights, sounds like the people's attendance drops the more nights that it goes on, is that fair to say? Curious to know if we roughly, of the town meeting members who've been elected, they're actually showing up and participating for, let's say, certainly the first night, and then consequently for all the nights. One would think that would be.
Yes, that's, well, it's, yeah, it's in the 126.
We do track it.
Yeah.
It's tracked because people sign in.
Yep.
So it's tracked at the beginning of the night. Right, it doesn't get tracked when people start disappearing, but it is tracked at the beginning of the night. We also put a thing a couple of years ago that if somebody does not show up for 50% of the meetings, they no longer take advantage of the automatic, you get on the ballot. They actually have to go out and work to get back on the ballot as kind of a disincentive for people to skip it. But yeah, I think in my experience in talking to people will book, we have September town meeting, they'll book Monday and Wednesday and hold it in terms of their life calendar, and then thinking it probably will get through it. And then if something happens and we have to go to the next one, they already booked that out to go on vacation or something. So that's kind of how it sometimes.
You can also check attendance with the late meeting and roll call.
Yeah.
You last at rooms 3 nights.
Well, I guess it's there's a slide for that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about warrant articles and some of the timelines. Warrant articles are issued by the select board. Warrants, rather, are issued by the select board. They have the time and place of the meeting and include the warrant articles. The warrant articles are the agenda of town meeting. Warrant language does not have to be exact, but it has to provide notice of what will be addressed. Actions taken have to be in the scope of the warrant article. So a warrant article cannot be changed significantly and voted on. You're looking at what's within the warrant article with certain amendments.
Because you can do less about what stated.
So
The overall function of the warrant is to provide warning to the town as to what town meeting is going to cover. It's not on the warrant. If the town has not been told it's coming up, the town meeting cannot do that.
So the select board prepares and issues the warrant. Select board, town meeting members, the moderator, school committee, and residents with 10 voter signatures may propose items for the warrant. Zoning in Burlington, zoning and general bylaw articles are due 90 days before town meeting to be included in the warrant. All other bylaws are due 45 days before town meeting. In Burlington, warrants are either mailed or emailed 14 days before town meeting. The printer deadline is about 2 weeks before the mailing. Just FYI, Mass General Laws requires a 7-day notice for regular town meeting, although many towns give 2 weeks notice.
What other bylaws we have besides zoning in general?
That's it.
That's it.
The zoning and anything else is general.
Any other warrant articles, I should say, not bylaws, any other warrant articles. So I'm gonna
Take some,
accept.
yeah.
Thank you.
Wait, before you go on, just, this. Notice of the town meeting articles, can that suffice just to have town post? It says 7 days, but that's just posting it on the website. It can be passive like that.
No, it has to be delivered. Are you talking about what Mass General laws require?
The 7 day notice of for regular town meeting. I mean,
So that's the warrants. Okay, so warrants are posted and mailed at the same time. So there's posting and delivery.
but they're only mailed to town meeting members.
Or emailed if that choice has been made.
But to town meeting members, it's not to the town.
Correct. And however, the warrants have to be posted for the town. Usually it's in the regular places. I know they have the town bulletin board and in the bylaw, it talks about it.
What do other towns do on the 90-day thing? Is that a?
That's Burlington
So-
specific.
So, you have the back girl, thank you.
Yeah, I just am wondering how other.
Just say it.
Betsy, can we ask one more parking lot question? How electronic versus paper warrants being mailed to people? Like, I've always seen it as a significant source of financial waste for the town to be mailing paper warrants to people who don't want them. And I know Mass General law, is it true that Mass General law requires paper warrants to be mailed out? Or is it in our bylaws or like, wait?
Right now, someone can pull out, but it's
Right.
physical order.
Yeah, but why is it the default if they're gonna be a physical question? I mean, if in the printing business, I know how much printing paper costs, especially the kind of printing that we're doing. So anyway, just for discussion and
It's in the parking.
it's in the parking.
We can absolutely
Both sides of the page.
we can look into it. I believe things are starting to evolve, but the language requires delivery. And so how that's interpreted, certainly charters and special acts have language in them that may be different from the Mass General laws.
That's, yeah.
So, that is.
You could specify if you wanted to.
If you wanted to, you could make that specification. And as we say, of course, you will have your town council take a look at anything that is written and make sure that that is going to pass muster. But, yes, you could specify that being the default. We'll take a look at what some other communities are doing. I think many of them are still printing. I think that seems to be, they may not require them being picked up. The public may pick them up, they may pick up extras to the public. Some, rather than mailing, have it available at the police station or town hall and save the cost of mailing. So things are done a little differently. Now, we can get a little more data on that. It's helpful.
Could I ask you one question on the previous slide? You have one slide. So is a warrant does not appear in front of town meeting unless the select board adds it. So there is no mechanism for the population at large to add a warrant unless it is through the select.
It goes through with 10 voter signatures. The select board needs to put an article on the warrant.
Okay.
So,
So the warrants is the big government in the part.
the articles are the individual and exact. And so, the select board needs to prepare it, but they're required to put some items onto the warrant, some articles. into the warrant.
So I think you will see by the select board stuff.
Okay, I see. I'm asking this more from the standpoint of can the select board opt to not put a thing on the warrant, even if a population asks for that? Okay, great. See, ahead, we're good.
If a warrant article is properly presented to the select board, we don't get to vote on whether they like it.
Gotcha.
They gotta put it on.
Okay, thanks.
There may be, it may not come to anything if the warrant article is asking for something that's not legally permissible,
Sure.
but it has to be on.
And they do pass advisory votes on some items, the select board does, but that's a separate vote from some.
Any other questions? Between all of us, we'll figure it out. Okay, so. No, I guess that's next. Just taking a look at zoning submissions, because I knew this would be a question of the 90 days. The bylaw says the Board of Selectmen shall, within 14 days of receipt of such zoning ordinance or bylaw, which essentially is the warrant article, when something is put together and presented to it, it must be submitted to the planning board for review. No zoning or ordinance or bylaw or amendment thereto shall be adopted until after the planning board has held a public hearing at which interested persons shall be given an opportunity to be heard. The public hearing shall be held within 65 days after the proposed zoning ordinance or bylaw is submitted to the planning board. No vote to adopt any such proposed ordinance or bylaw or amendment thereto shall be taken until a report with recommendations by the planning board. So this is consistent to Mass General Law 48, Section 5, which requires a hearing within 65 days. So I believe this has been the rationale for the 90 days, is to make sure that this hearing occurs. But, you know, so this is one of the items that I really think at the end of this, we'll talk about next steps. I think this would be a great item if you have some members of the staff in to talk about the deadline, the reason for the deadline, and if and how it can be shortened. But this is the bylaw as it stands. So
At one point, it was 45 days. And the committee that was working and reviewing different zoning bylaws, submissions for town meeting, and was working on bylaws, forth a proposal to change that to 90 days because something that was submitted within on the 45th day or likely would not get a proper, and often did not get a proper hearing and before it went for a vote by the planning board and then before town meetings. So the idea was that there should be enough time for the proponents to present something and then have it considered, give them time to go back for there to be discussion before it goes. So the process doesn't need to be rushed. That was sometime in the early 2000s.
Frequently, there can be items before the planning board that require some outside traffic engineer to the applicant all the new things. And if they don't get it done in time, they would lose their opportunity.
So this is definitely an item that I think is important to everyone on the committee. It's something that we need to look at in more detail. And so I would say more so than even in the parking lot, it's in, it's in the valet parking area, but
So it's a definite follow-up session.
absolutely. And you asked in general about other cities and towns. It's very different. Sometimes it's not stated in the bylaw. Sometimes it's right in the charter, and sometimes it's a bit confusing. I think it's like, in some towns it says 7 weeks before the Tuesday before town meetings. And some, the select board announced the closing date with respect to each town meeting. So there's a lot of variety.
I do think, in full disclosure, I'm the chair of CBRC zoning bylaws review committee. So this is kind of in my sweet spot. And part of what I believe the timing does, Sally is also on the is that zoning can come up, there can be a zoning article that comes up. We can put together the wording and submit it to the planning board. And then we talk to the planning board and they may kick the tires a little bit about this seems to work here. Have you thought about this? It's really almost like a working session. And so that you can, before you get to the deadline, when you cannot change a word, you have a chance to think through some issues that maybe you haven't thought through all the way. And then it'll minimize any changes that need to be made on the town meeting floor, which we want to make sure we do. And so that, and then when you have the public, public hearing, if there are people who speak one way or another about the article you're considering, you have a chance to actually reflect those issues if they are going to influence what you're going to be presenting. And then get a final one done and with the final public hearing and then submitted to the select board for inclusion. So it actually helps the process, even though it's a long time and it is difficult because it's such a long time, but it does make it a more iterative process and there are less changes that actually have to be made on the at town meeting, which for those of you who aren't on town meetings, sometimes if there are changes to be made, somebody will write up a note and give it to the moderator, they project it, they cross out words, they propose new wording, but nobody has any chance to really think about the implications and whether there are any sort of unintended consequences that are going to happen as a result of that. So that's really not what we want to be doing. So,
And to that point, one reason that this came up was because there were items submitted that town meeting didn't have an opportunity to read because the documents that were at the back of the room that were presumably what town meeting was voting on, no one had a chance. And so the land use committee, just for the record, I was the chair then, put forth a proposal because to change the timing in order to give everyone an opportunity and to make sure that what went out to town meeting was essentially the final piece of zoning. And it has worked since then. Mostly.
Another factor is if the bylaw change is time sensitive, we think that that would take it over to the next town meeting because he didn't get a chance to look out the details on it.
How often does that occur?
well, we have 90 days.
Now it doesn't.
Now it's done.
But anyhow, that's rationale, I think, for the 90 days for this budget.
I have a request from the chat. Can you restate your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Sally Willard. I'm just an attendee here.
That's for the chat.
Technology.
I'm gonna say, yeah, we'll learn the mess.
And here on the
Drivers. This is just reiterates what we talked before, the little chart so you can see. So 90 days before town meeting, zoning and general bylaw articles. 45 days before all other articles. About 30 days before is graphic design and printing. And 14 days before town meeting, there's posting and distribution. And then you have town meeting.
I think we need to add final zoning in general, or when the final articles are due. Because the final is not 90 days. That is the initial shot that you're getting, but that's not when you have to get the actual, well, it's got to be close, but it doesn't need to be exact.
90 days is when you have to go. It's for one.
Correct. That's when you have to put the article, present an article that the planning board is going to weigh in on and the other committees are going to weigh in on. And another key date is about 30 days before is when it goes to print. Now, I mean, I guess the goal is to get most of it in print in order to be sent out in time. Although we do understand that there's often last minute changes will be brought to town.
Yeah. So what is that final deadline, the final wording deadline for zoning and?
That's where I think we need to add that. So we need to add that.
Nobody has said yet, right?
It's about
Well,
30 days.
that is about 30 days to get it into the packet. It may change even on the floor of town meeting.
No. That's what we're talking about. What is the final? There's a final wording is due, which is before it goes to print.
Right, and I think that they said every year, the clerk sends out a calendar of when that is due.
Correct.
There's not a date certain, but it's usually, from my understanding, from talking to the clerk and others, it's to have it in before the print date.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so that can change. Changes depending on when the printing date is set. And that language may change again on the floor of town.
Just to be clear, that chart, I was thinking in my head the whole time, it would be interesting to have a visual representation of the deadlines. And you put a chart, that's great. That seems to solve a lot of problems. But in the presentation, where does that chart live? I assume it's not a part of the charter, meaning, that's not kind of thing you put in the charter, but it might be in supporting documents on the website or I don't even know, I don't think it would be in a bylaw, but that's the kind of thing that makes it more acceptable for the public. Maybe not, the clerk, I presume, knows this very well, but for the public to understand, why does it take 90 days? What's going on? That's the kind of thing that I think would provide clarity to people to understand what's going on.
Sounds like a fun chart to me.
Right. Is this a bylaw? The time frame?
Yes.
The 90 and 45 days.
And most charters would leave that to the bylaw. There are a couple charters that put it into the charter, or whatever.
But today it resides in.
Today it resides in the bylaw and not in the special acts. So, that could be changed. And I believe that there are internal, you mentioned internal charts when everything is due. But I think that's a fantastic idea to make that more public.
They should set up a website.
When everything is due. I don't.
The selectman's office says something,
I was gonna say the selectman's office.
There's something on the town meeting website, but I don't know if it has that drop dead date.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's, I believe that the select board, administrators or administrative group sends it out to like your committee chairs. So I don't know that it's and that gives all the, September 5th. I mean, it's that kind of specificity for each town meeting. And I don't know where that's posted or if that's posted. I just know that committee chairs get it. But that would be a question about when things are due.
Right, and that can be part of, even though that's not going to go into your charter, that can be part of your recommendations, is that something like that is more considered.
Right. And because it's already in the bylaw, we probably need to understand what the bylaw says about it to decide whether we just say it's in the bylaw and we're going to keep it there and it looks fine. Thank you very much. Maybe that's.
I'm visualizing the woodbook process almost like a citizen's guide to town meeting, which would be kind of.
Yeah.
I've heard that term somewhere, and I don't think it's mine, so I do think it exists either for our town or another town, but something that's a little bit more accessible and graphical. That's something that Burlington Buzz would create.
Yes, and I'm thinking also in terms of, if a major mission of this whole group is to, help clarify some of the rules and how things are functioning. Certainly the formation of a charter itself, it's still going to be pretty dense. So there might be an opportunity, again, maybe that's overreaching a lot of work, but something like a citizens guide to go along with it. So if you don't feel like even reading the charter, reading the bylaws, you can get some very approachable, understanding information. Even this might be too detailed for that, because maybe no one cares.
I think that's great. I just have to be citizens guide. So we're good.
I think that's a good action item for a communications officer, and once a communications officer is hired and set up.
And so let's move on this one. We got it.
And the
External communication.
No,
You've heard the term Citizens Guide to Town Meeting because that's a state document
Okay.
that's provided that talks about town meeting open and representative town meeting and helps people understand what it's all about. Okay, so we've been talking about my discussion points already. How does a 90-day and 45 deadlines working out for Burlington? We talked about this. Definitely something we're going to look into some more. We talked about how does the schedule of 3 annual meetings, but how does that affect warrant article time? So having 3 meetings means that the spring meeting, well, I think it's in the earlier meeting in May, finishes, and within a couple of weeks, you're starting the 90 days. In a few weeks, you're starting the 90 days. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that the 90 days comes up really quickly. Just a piece of information. So this is an area where I really think the committee may want to consider getting some input from staff and relevant volunteers about it, timeline changes, because there are a lot of moving parts in these timelines, and it's important to know how making any changes will impact.
so in your discussions with the people you've talked to, have you heard anything that would indicate that it's problematic?
To shorten the deadlines?
Just having those deadlines.
No, I really haven't. I think that, you know, some of the same things that you brought up today, is that the 90 days gives time for all of this process to go through. On the other hand, the fact that you have 3 town meetings makes everything happen really quickly, even though it's in 90 days. So it's the same exact analysis that you've already gone through. I don't believe I think that the staff is going to say they'll do whatever has to be done. But I think it's important to kind of hear from them. You may want to hear from them on these deadlines, among other things. I'm sure you'll have a list of questions, things that you're interested in hearing from perhaps the clerk or perhaps, you know, select board member or somebody to understand the impact of these deadlines.
How does, I'm process-wise, how does that happen? I mean, what is, we invite them into this group and say, we'd like to invite you in to share your perspectives on town meeting, about timing, about the number of meetings and what's working well, what's not? Is it that kind of thing?
Absolutely. You can have people in. You've also talked about having some individual staff interviews. You can talk to them outside and share what we've learned. I did talk to a couple staff just to get the background information for this presentation. But I think the committee, probably it's more important for the committee to hear from it. So you can have, you can set aside a meeting where you have some staff in to talk about it, or you can talk to staff outside of the meeting and bring in and share what you.
Yes.
I would also suggest that perhaps we might consider talking to all the staff, retired students. Yeah, they're.
Just as an FYI, when Pat was interviewing our town clerk, she interviewed 2 town clerks. The one who just retired and the one that's currently there. So it was a joint, and so there we go.
That was very helpful. So we do recommend that you talk to people before you do this. Not just, you know, especially something like these timelines, which is going to affect many different organizations. It's going to be part of your deliberations, what you decide to vote for the town.
What's been your experience? I mean, if we call in I mean, Lynn knows as an example, but she's kind of the major orchestrator of a lot of this stuff. And we invite her to come in with Jennifer Priester, town clerk, and say, we'd like to talk to you about this process. I mean, does that tend to work, or do people like get, gun shy and kind of say, is it not comfortable? I'm just concerned about how that works in practice.
I would say that, the town clerk, who's an elected official, would be an excellent to bring in. I mean, they would be very comfortable. I think staff members, employees of the town, staff and elected officials and our appointed officials may be more comfortable having an interview, get some background information. But that's really your decision. The other thing that I would kind of caution is you may want to save up some of your questions, and because, for example, the clerk, we're going to have more talking about the clerk a little bit later, rather than bringing it in a couple of times, you may want to save up some questions. Or you can just choose to have one meeting that's devoted to a panel of few people that you have questions of. It's entirely, I think it's something that maybe you'll think through in your working group or smaller group about what would be the best way to solicit this information. But, it's really up to the committee. So, the committee as a whole can decide who do they want to have in that one.
I'm kind of looking to you for guidance.
Yep.
And your experience with the places,
Absolutely.
in terms of what is the most productive and effective way of getting the information.
Right, and it's helpful to have, it is helpful when people can come. It's something that you can't plan on. You have to give them a little time because they may not be able to schedule a meeting. But is to perhaps pick a few officials that you want. Maybe the clerk, maybe the administrator. There's a few people who will be very helpful with the procedural on the ground elements that aren't necessarily contained in bylaws, that in special acts that we can't get just from reading the bylaws. Am I going in the wrong direction now? You. This. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit, you mentioned there's rules of town meeting procedures. They're contained both in rules and bylaws. We're not going to go through these in elaborate detail, although if any of these hidden are something that you want to revisit, we should, put them in the parking lot to make sure that we address them. Town meeting procedures and rules are contained both in local bylaws and in the town meeting handbook. There may be some additional, the handbook is, I'm not sure how many years old, but it's a little bit old. So there may be additional rules that are contained in it. But in general, this committee is not going to explore every single little rule of town meeting because we're looking at the broad bones of the structure. But I want you to understand them and be familiar. The handbook says there's 7 basic rules. I imagine that there's probably about 50 of them now, but here are some ideas of what the rules are. The rules of debate. The town meeting has adopted Robert's rules of debate. The other option is a publication called Town Meeting Time, which is put together by the Town Moderators Association. But it's one or the other. I don't think that there's a preference, but Robert's rules has been working for the town. There's a rule about the procedures for roll call voting, about taking attendance and when it has to occur. There's an automatic roll call. For example, motions requiring a 2/3 vote require a roll call unless they're unanimous. These are small procedural items that a town moderator would be looking at during the town meeting. I'm just bringing these up as, to mention.
We don't take a roll call vote.
Oh, well, maybe I'm reading wrong.
But it could be that the handbook is old and it's just never been updated.
It could be,
And
it could be.
There are some 2/3 votes where if there's one person opposed, council has said I can't.
So, and I don't know, do you do the people in the aisle counting when you need to do, but, and as I said, this is what the town meeting handbook has to be updated, but these are examples of rules. Just so you understand that the moderator is, it's following the specific orders and they have we're going to be talking about the moderator in a little bit. They are making the decisions regarding and in line with these rules. There's a prohibition of side activities like including distributing petitions or literature during town meeting. There's a code of ethics. Many of you probably are aware that town meeting does not implicate conflict of interest laws. However, the town can put together rules, even though the conflict of interest laws are not in place, the town can put together its own rules and standards for how to identify conflicts.
We don't do that. This is a common. Several people will speak who have a financial interest or whatever in town meeting, right? They're supposed to refuse this. Well,
They're not required to, but the rules, and I'm sure the rules that I've read in the town meeting handbook say that there should be a disclosure before speaking. So you can quietly vote, you can quietly, but if you're going to speak about an issue before town meeting, the rules say that you should note any financial or employment relationship, family relationship, et cetera.
if you're voting on a budget and your spouse is employed by the town who would be affected by the budget, do you have to recuse yourself?
No,
There's no requirement for it.
no, but if you're,
There's no requirement to own up to it if you speak.
Okay.
so if you speak on a matter, you should disclose it. The rules contain the time and schedule of meetings, Monday and Wednesdays, that's from the bylaw as well. Set Mondays and Wednesdays at 7:30 with a quorum required, consecutive Mondays and Wednesdays excluding legal holidays. That can be changed. Oh, is that no longer?
We changed the time.
7. All right, so
And the duties of the rules committee also, I don't believe are accurate. And they are. That's right. It's not accurate.
okay, so the town meeting handbook needs to be updated, but maybe that we should, maybe that should be something we should talk about is a written publication that puts in place what are the current rules being used in town. Maybe that is something.
Whose role is it to produce that document?
I think that's the town now staff decision.
Communications office.
That's all it's sort of on my meeting.
We have a communications officer.
I imagine that and this is and I didn't ask this question of the clerks, but the clerks maybe thinking, the clerks are the reporters of town meeting. So they may have kept an updated list of what the rules are. Do you know who's holding current list of rules?
No,
Okay,
It's regulations, so.
they do. And so I'm not sure how in your town you're recording votes.
Should that be something that gets codified? Or documentation at some level, maybe the bylaw level as opposed to the charter level, to at least acknowledge that there is an individual or body who is responsible with saying this document that it is reviewed X number of years.
It's essentially unchanged since the late nineties.
So to Russ's point,
Just like there's other language about charter and bylaws saying, here's this person or group owns it, this frequency of review.
But, well, I wouldn't necessarily, many of these rules are in the bylaws already, just so you know. But I think it's always helpful, while I would not necessarily put every single town meeting rule in bylaw, because those are flexible and changed by town meeting. You may want to assign that duty to someone and say, this is the person responsible
I was just gonna
for
say,
maintaining the rules.
in the parking lot, I made a comment about the town meeting handbook. And I think we need to discuss who it is. It feels to me the rules committee is really the body that should be taking charge of this. That hence their name, not like this, but that to me is like, if they're the rules committee, they need to be the ones who maintain what the rules are. But we can come back to that in terms of your comment, Russ, about should there be a reference to who is responsible for maintaining a current town meeting handbook.
Is that document itself even something that is prescribed through the bylaws or through something versus someone just made it one day, it was handy, so we kept making it. The fact that it exists might be worth calling out.
So I have to say something. I've served as chairman of the rules committee. I've served in it for many years. We don't know any of that stuff, seriously. So this really has to be examined.
And I believe that is from the bylaw. Well, you know, these are all, I think this is why we're going through these, such detail so that we can understand.
Can you come back to us with whether the rules committee the stuff you have here is in a bylaw, and if so, where and what? I think we need to understand that.
And it's, I recall it's in kind of an odd section of the bylaw. It's not in,
You'll find it quicker than we will then.
I won't, I'll send it to you. Send you the.
Way back when some town meeting approved their own implementations.
And they still do.
We haven't addressed it for an awful long time, but we know that money in the eighties.
So, summary in general, procedural rules are not contained in the charter. However, the committee's report can contain recommendations for updating rules. You, as a committee, you may not be getting into the minutia of recommending what rules should be put together for a town meeting, but a recommendation surrounding transparency of the rules, et cetera, might be.
And who's responsible?
Who's responsible, maybe something like this.
Yeah.
Okay, and as the other one, you might want to get some additional input as to whether recommending changes. And by changes to town meeting rules, I guess what I mean more is changes to publication of town meeting.
That's going to be a warrant article because it's going to be posted.
Absolutely. But this is a starting place where we're identifying issues that you may be able to do. Okay, let's talk a little bit about town meeting members. Under the special act, checking the time, we may start speaking up in some of this to get out of here at a reasonable time. Under the special act, there's 126 members, 18 from each precinct, 3-year terms. Any registered voter is eligible, including town employees. New candidates, as Betsy already alluded to, have to complete nomination papers with 10 voter signatures. Incumbents can simply indicate their intent to run again by giving 21 days notice before nomination. There's more recent bylaw requires 50% attendance in order to take advantage of this incumbency provision and not get 10 signatures. Just, this is just the last couple of years, the attendance record that's online. Now, some of you have asked for it, there's more, it goes back quite a way, so you can certainly find. But I thought you might find it interesting, going back to 23, 50%, 58% in January, that was kind of a light meeting. And then in May, the first day, 71, it went down to 64% the second day. September, 75%. I was there only one date in that September, but that was the only one I had attendance records for. January, 76%. So you can see here kind of the general pattern. The highest percentage tends to be in May, although in January you had 87% attendance, and well, I guess you've gotten up to 89%. So there doesn't really seem to be a flow of whether you're talking about which meeting you're attending.
It appears almost like over time we're getting better. We have one anomaly, I guess the third meeting in September, but September the general trend.
That was 24, yeah. 2020, yeah. 2020, although it continued and you had hybrid meetings, there's data for that. So this is just a little snapshot.
Yeah.
So if you're curious how you've been doing, I didn't get together a percentage of all this, but you seem to have, 75 to up to 89% at many of your meetings. There's a couple of bubbles down, 63, 64, 58%. That is, because it's 8 o'clock, we won't go into too much analysis of this just yet, but it's just something to keep in mind as we're going through our, we can look at it in more detail.
What's on the warrant, which
Exactly.
Yes. I think September was nothing higher.
But I have to say, I always ask for the number of people, and generally over the years, it's a good 21% of 26 do not show up. That's well, I don't know how it compares with other towns.
And when you're talking a little more detail about what days it's on, et cetera, at times we can talk a little bit more about ways of improving attendance, but I want to get through just a couple of rules about town meeting members. Someone who moves away to another precinct in town serves until the next election. If you move out of town, then you're no longer eligible to serve, and the vacancies are filled by the precincts until the next regular election. Members are not eligible to hold other elected positions at the same time under the special act. They can serve in the following appointed positions plus one additional position. So essentially, there's you've been committees appointed by the moderator. So there's a lot of exceptions. Committees appointed by the moderator, temporary committees, officer of election, and members of your town committee. So they're exempting some of these positions from the rule of one other position. And I imagine in a town like Burlington, there are people who wear several hats. Just in general, we talked a little bit, is the size of town meeting appropriate for the town? You have 6 elected per precinct each year. When I reviewed how many candidates you had about 4 to 8 candidates run in each precinct. There's only a couple of precincts where you didn't have sufficient number of candidates running. So in general, you have at least a number of candidates, maybe 1 or 2 more than you need in each precinct. That can be kind of a sign that you might be at the sweet spot in number of voters and that you have some competition. And you're a fairly small town meeting to begin with. So, you would probably you may or may not be interested in making it a smaller town meeting, but it sounds like you have an approximately diverse number of candidates looking at
It was discussed when we went from 6 and 7 precincts. if you want to reduce the number of sections, no, we'd stay 8 people.
We can talk about, now and in future meetings about attendance motivators. I think that Nikki had some discussion of things. You know, there are things like, you know, babysitting days of the week. What makes people attend? Is it just what's on the warrant article that makes them attend? Is it the date? Is it the time? What other things can you do to get people to attend? You now have this rule where if you don't show up 50% of the time, you have to get signatures. Some towns,
3-year term.
for the over 3 years, if you don't show up, that's kind of, you know, somewhat like a minimum bar. There are some towns that have, if you don't show up for 50% over a certain period of time, you're automatically removed unless the precinct votes to not. So the precinct would weigh in on, for example, would they say, you know, is there a reason they didn't show up? And look at it in that way. So, you know, I think if there's any interest in looking at something that's a little bit more punitive, you can certainly look at those. But it sounds like what you're doing now may be starting to have an effect.
Can you get us a list of attendance motivators from other towns?
Sure. You can give you some examples.
To take a look at what other corporate towns are. Free
Yeah.
copy.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit, you know, there's a separate process for incumbents. Do you find that, and it's certainly, you're using it as a motivator for attendance. But do you find that having a separate process makes it too easy for people to just notify that they're doing it again? It doesn't leave room for other people to run for office. Is it, you know, but in your case, you don't necessarily have, you don't have 2 people running for every position. So there's not a ton of competitiveness to begin with, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Before I had something to do.
Yes, I was actually, I ran and kicked out an incumbent myself, and I helped someone else do the same. And I think we're in the perfect sweet spot right now to where if there's 6 incumbents, a challenger, as long as they get their name out there and we have to beat someone, otherwise they don't get in. I think that is like a good balance of incumbents being impossible to get rid of, like they are most candidates, versus them having no advantage at all.
And I may be conflicting a little bit, but what Corey's saying is just that you may be onto something, Pat, that it is really easy for incumbents to stay on and not. I would have to look at attendance to see whether or not it is mostly incumbents or mostly not incumbents, or if there's any trend there to see, you know, if that does motivate attendance or not. But yeah, I mean, precinct 6 is a huge example of folks being able to just, I mean, do the minimum amount of effort of like sending a letter to people in the precinct, and now people know your name and they'll vote for you forward, which definitely, yeah, it works for you and a couple other guys.
And there are occasional people who say, we need younger people at town meeting, and there are 6 candidates, and they want the incumbent process.
Age discrimination.
No, making room for them.
It's making room.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It just might seem intimidating to somebody who would like to run and they see six incumbents on the ballot. And then they're like, well, you know, and say what you will about people should, you know, not be intimidated or whatever, but people do get intimidated, especially if they're younger people, especially if they're not experienced, and especially if people who are in that role have been doing it for a while. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't.
Maybe we should have to.
Parking lot?
Yeah.
The other thing that I just found interesting is I believe you do post your attendance records online,
We do.
which not all towns do. So it definitely gives the electorate an opportunity to take a look at attendance and let factor into their decision
It
making process.
used to be in the newspaper when we first did this. When we had that consent thing, it was posted in the newspaper, but now we don't really actually have a newspaper. So
Yeah, I did get it for a while, which was, but I don't get it anymore. So that could be something that I add on the reporting pretty well, especially during candidate like election time. And saying like, hey, don't forget to check the attendance. Here it is. Take a look at what's going on in your precinct.
This was discussed umpteen years ago, and the theory was if you post the names of the people who didn't get their name recognition, they should be, didn't want to do that.
well,
It's in the parking lot.
well, actually, I have term numbers in the but I think we will come back at.
That's the town meeting.
Okay, with our 15 remaining minutes, actually, we have the benefit of having the town meeting moderator right here. So I'm sure he will review my slides and let me know where I've gone wrong. Yes.
I have to correct you. You have the previous one.
Oh,
So,
wow. Now, I wish I had known that. I would have, triple checked the slides. But, so please feel free to chime in. We're going to go over this fairly quickly because I know that we'll have even more information on this coming out. Essentially, town meeting met in Burlington. Your moderators are elected annually for 1 year. State law allows 1 or 3 year terms. The town moderator presides at all the town meetings and votes in the event of a tie, appoints a deputy to serve in the moderator's absence, and appoints the Ways and Means committees and other standing and special committees. We're going to go through some of those important committees, not in a ton of detail tonight, but I want you to know what they are. I wanted you to take a look at what some other towns are doing. Really, they're split equally on the 1 to 3 year terms. It's something that, if you may wish to talk about. There's benefits and drawbacks to both. Many feel that, for a new person to get up and running as a town moderator, they really need a few years, a couple more years to learn the rules before the election kicks in. Other people think that a 3 year term insulates the moderator a little more from concerns that they will make decisions. That would never happen, but that from the appearance of making decisions, even elections coming up and wanting people to like them, as opposed to making decisions according to the rules. However, most of the moderators are well-trained and professional, and that's not going to happen, but that's oftentimes an argument used in favor for a little longer terms. 1 year terms encourage more mobility in the position, more comings and goings. It's something that, you may want to talk about before putting it in the charter. That's definitely going to be a charter item because it's an elected position. You'll have to decide, you'll have to talk about the terms for each of the budget.
is it appropriate to put that in the charter? In your experience?
Absolutely. The terms of office is the bare bones that goes into a charter. So are the elected officials.
We will have to.
You will have to decide this, who are the elected officials and what their terms are.
Now, is it state law that the moderator is elected by the citizenry, or can it be that the moderator is elected by town meeting body?
It is not required to be elected. Both ways are accounted for. However, the general law is very old, and almost all of the open town meetings have moved to elections by the citizenry, especially for representative towns. Because if you think about open town meetings, there's still a couple of towns that may elect the moderator from open town meeting, but you have everyone in town, every voter in town is invited to that town meeting to participate in the election process. So not aware of any representative town meetings that would elect from town. Arlington does. No, look at that.
What's that?
I thought Arlington
Or one of them have their terms.
And I'll definitely take a look at that because that's an interesting question.
Patrick's.
None of the comparables that we looked at, but really, it's more of a function of open space than it would be for rural setting. I know that, a few years ago, I was for another town on a charter committee, and they recommended changing it to internally. However, that charter didn't pass, so not necessarily because of that provision, but so that's why I'm not really aware of any representative ones, but I will take a look. So, if that's
I mean, if that's something we want to discuss, whether it's elected by the citizens or by the body. I guess that's something we should also, if we're going to be talking about town moderator, we should put that on the list of things to discuss. So can you capture that?
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that for representative town meetings, you can do a little more digging. Work on it that way. I think, I'm just going to briefly go through the committees that are appointed by the moderator, and there are others. These are the ones that are defined in bylaws. There are others, especially like the ad hoc committee. You mentioned that you're appointing, you may need to appoint something on electronic voting. Thank you. But these are some of the ones in the bylaws. I just wanted to go through these. These we'll be talking about, not necessarily in a lot of detail, but there may be procedural issues that come up. And I want you to understand as we go through this, what is a legislative committee? These are legislative committees designed to advise how meeting, as opposed to executive branch committees, which we'll be talking about there under the purview of this slide. The Ways and Means Committee, 15 voters, most must be on town meeting. Not be town officers or employees, 3-year terms. And they make recommendations on financial matters. They may also, but are not required to make recommendations on non-financial matters. Capital Budget Committee, 7 voters over 3 years. They consider, and I'd love for you to chime in when you tell me, I don't think it's committee meets anymore. Right. Like how that meeting. Absolutely. But as we go through all those, not capital funds.
So is it 7 voters or 7 town meeting members or?
The bylaw says 7 voters. Okay. There's another section that might apply. You may have to have majority of town members, but it's just in the bylaw it says 7.
Okay.
And does it say they have to be town meeting members or largest vote?
It doesn't say that in the bylaw. There may be a separate rule that covers whether the majority have to be town meeting members. But in the particular one for this, it only says voters. And one of the things this would be, in general, most charters all charters would include the, what sometimes called Ways and Means Finance Committee, that they're all kind of the same body. That would be in a charter. Their composition is often in the charter and deal with it in the budget section of the charter. Capital Budget Committee is sometimes listed in the charter. Some of the other committees are left entirely in the bylaw because, and you may want to leave some of this in the bylaw because sometimes places have a hard time filling these committees and they're smaller or bigger. And Capital Budget Committee, 7 voters, 3 years, advises on capital. I think most of you are familiar with it. There's a Bylaw Review Committee, 7 voters for 3 years, considers and advises on all proposed bylaws in the warrant and additional articles as requested or required. The Town Facilities Committees, 7 members, 1 from each precinct for a 2-year term.
I don't think we have one of those. Operation.
And that was one of the questions that we had.
They never got me footage. They never, I know you tried.
We had a report in 2012 or something, and then it was fizzled.
Yeah, it's a thing we run out of.
Right.
And yeah, this committee never figured out what it should be doing after that. It figured out how it could be different. No role that wasn't already covered by that was no reason. Tried a few times.
So, because that particular committee probably wouldn't be included in the charter, it might be one of your recommendation areas to say either this committee no longer meets, let's take it out of the bylaws, or I recommend you look at whether this committee meets and take it out of the bylaws. It's kind of a parking lot. We've been talking about, you're definitely developing the charter, but you might be making suggestions on bylaws as well. Rules Committee, 13 members, at least one from each precinct, and a one-year term. Reviews and makes recommendations on the conduct of town meeting. This may be an area we talked about. Maybe they should be documenting the rules as well. Serves as steering authority for warrant articles. I don't have a ton of time, but I'm a little curious about that one. There's been some, AG opinions that talk about how much steering can be done by a steering committee. Basically, if the warrant, an article needs to go on the warrant, it needs to go on the warrant because steering, so I'm a little curious about the steering functions, but that's the bylaws is they are act as steering.
That's what the bylaw says they do?
Yes.
They don't.
And there's a lot of limits to what the AG allows as far as steering because of the authority to put things. Assist the moderator in helping appointments, in selecting appointments. I don't know if they do any of that, but it's the bylaw. And they advise on other matters as requested or required. Just to fly through these, land use committee, 9 members, at least one from each precinct. Might be appointed as liaisons, reviews and makes recommendations, reviews and discusses maps, and it says, if the article requires the planning board to make a recommendation, the bylaw requires the planning board to notify the land use committee of a public hearing for land use zoning issues. I believe you said you were on the land use.
I was, yes.
Is it still in meeting, in existence?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Where it says 9 members, is that town meeting members or just 9 members of the committee?
9 town meetings.
And so someone on that committee has to be a member.
Yes, I believe that's what the bylaw says.
So
And
9
you
town
must have at least one from each precinct.
So that's 9 town meeting members, not 9 members.
Correct. It doesn't, as opposed to voters, just general voters, we can, we'll make sure that.
Yeah, let's make sure that's right.
Well, we'll take a look at the bylaw, but I mean, it's a 3-year term and it might not match up with somebody's, time on town meeting.
Can you verify that?
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely. The Human Services Advisory Committee, 7 members. And I will verify that too, because, it's town meeting members and I just simplified it to members, but I'll take a look. Considers human services programs, makes recommendations, gathers information on human services, and reports on matters referred to it. Does anyone have any experience about whether the Human Services Advisory Committee is still meeting?
Carl is the head of it.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
So we,
Still exists, so it's still out.
Great, fantastic.
I'm not sure
If you know anybody who wants to be.
I don't know that it's, I need to check and see if they
We will check. Yeah, absolutely.
actually do that.
Okay. So just, it's 8:25 and I know that you all, it's been a long day for you. But just a couple of discussion points. We talked a little bit about the time and we've been talking as we go along, so might not have to consider this more, but in the future, you might want to talk about these appointments. Are there any, improvements? Are there any tweaking that we need to do in these committees? As far as recommendations to make, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, But, there might be some process improvements. How are we getting, these committees are often feeders to other avenues to get people into local government. Are we finding people, there are enough people for each committee, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Most of these standing committees will be contained in the bylaws rather than the charter, so it can be updated as needs are met. And we'll talk about the Ways and Means Committee in more detail in the finance section. I'm going to zip through this. I didn't want to leave the clerk out because we're going to have a whole section on the clerk later, but they are the clerk of the town meeting as well. They give the notice, et cetera, and perform other duties. They follow up on town meeting votes. So the clerk is an important part of town meeting. I don't know, Betsy, tell me if you want me to continue or stay.
I think maybe, we've had a lot to digest, and I think we need to really spend time on this. So I guess I'd like to go back, like stop here and then pick up the next meeting. I know we're going to have reports to the different committees, but you and Jess and I will talk offline about how we come back to some of this and how we have identifying how we're going to follow up on it, because I think that process at the moment is not totally clear. And so because we're going to have to come back and discuss these things and decide what's going to be in the charter and what's going to stay in the bylaw for probably all of these things we just reviewed, right? So I think if we stop here, then how much more do you have here?
I have just the one more section is referendum. I just was talking about,
Okay, well, let's whip through that then. So that's the last one.
can I put back to referendum?
Okay.
I just wanted you to, so town meeting articles, they're not final until 14 days after, and that allows for a time for a petition of 5% of the voters to require an issue to be placed on the ballot. And there are exceptions to these, votes to adjourn, et cetera, borrowing money, authorization, so budget of the town as a whole. So I don't know that this happens very often in any towns where it goes to.
We've never done this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's rare, but it exists for the sole purpose of making sure that that voters have an opportunity if something goes horribly wrong at town meeting, they have an opportunity to bring that matter to the ballot rather than just having it rest on town meeting.
So what this is saying, if after town meeting's over, you have to wait 2 weeks, and then some process, people can speak up and say they want to take this thing that you passed and make it a town-wide referendum, right? Within that 2 weeks. And if they don't, it's speak now or forever hold your peace time, right?
So just to give you some comparison, it relates to Mass General laws. It's much narrower because there's only a few things that can go to a post-meeting vote. And it's a 7-day deadline but you only need 3% signatures. But question to you was how often are they used? Probably not at all. Are the thresholds appropriate? There's about 18,000 voters in Burlington, so that means 5% of the voters means we need about 900 signatures to petition for an election. The town meeting is really intended to be the legislative body, but this is an opportunity to step in if, something goes wrong and if 900 people feel strongly enough about an issue that they want to be put before the full town rather than just the full town. So I wanted you to understand as well.
In which that election must take place.
Yes, I can't recall offhand. I think it's within 60 days. But it's within 14 days, they have to come up with the 900 signatures. And after that, an election is held to unleash. And that is why there are exceptions for things like funding, where you need to pay them, et cetera.
Those signatories have to state the question.
It will be a revisiting of the warrant article.
It's pretty overturn development. What language those language be decided?
There that information is somewhat included in the charter. But it's,
We're kind of required to do this, is what you're saying.
right.
We're
Well, you're
required.
required to, Mass General Law is a much narrower version of it. This is really what we call a public participation mechanism. This is to allow the voters to have some, input over and above what their elected officials. There's a state measure which is much narrower that would apply, but this is a little bit broader than the state, but most charters contain language.
If I may, Henry, you were asking questions around where the language is, or what the language might specifically be around this for the details. Where is the language currently residing that explains the 5%?
That would be, it's in the special act, requirements of the language are in the special act. But usually what happens is the clerk then prepares a document or a paper, a petition that they would have to fill in all the information. That's what language, it's usually about taking the same question that's meeting and they for this.
You're saying when the people vote on it, the same thing that town meeting vote. They vote yes. Or opposite.
It's similar to a veto. They sometimes call it a veto measure, or a veto.
So, as a practical matter, this referendum section would go into a charter as an opportunity of participation to veto should that happen. It's just like you have all the other stuff, you need to have that in there. It's like best practice, what we
It
should be
needs to
doing.
go in the charter. If you have it, it needs to go in the charter.
But do we need to have it?
It would likely default to the more narrow state version if you didn't have it.
So one way or another, you have a referendum. It's just what rules you're going to follow for them. It's your rules of the states.
That's the planning for the future. If you don't know what's going to happen, they have a state vote.
Exactly.
So that's, so next steps we talked about, and we will have in our planning meeting, we'll talk about the next steps because we have to digest a lot of this. Engagement with key officials to talk about some of these.
Mhm.
What we'll start to do at the Collins Center is we may do some preliminary draft of charter just to show you what your charter, now that we've talked about all the things in your charter, this is what a charter would look like as is, but then we always put discussion points for this, areas that you may not want to do. So we're going to probably start at this section, just so you can see if the charter language for the legislative branch is helpful. And then I think that's really going to help you visualize what goes in the charter versus what goes in science. So, and that's all I have for tonight. Thank you so much. You've been very patient and maybe great if you can y'all do the time tonight, open your questions.
Yeah, I think before people take off, are there any questions that, other than I got, say what my parking lot is, so we just, because I promised that we would do the parking lot at the end of the meeting. If I can understand it. We want to know some data about attendance impacted by the size of the body, and that was something the Collins Center will follow up with. They'll also follow up with 3 meetings a year if there are other towns that do that. Electronic versus paper warrants, mailing, are there any legal requirements one way or another about that we should be aware of so we can maybe make some recommendations on that? A citizen's guide to town meeting, that's for us to decide. We can figure out what that might be and who might. The town meeting handbook update, kind of who's going to be responsible, who's the responsible body person, role, whatever, for that one. Term limits, we probably need to talk about that in the context of the town meeting. The town facility committee meeting and the rules committee, what it says in the bylaw about what those committees are, so we can either remove them, edit them, whatever is best, or give them right, or improve them, yes. Make recommendations about them. So those are the ones I had, and then I said, if 15 people status, and I have no idea what I meant by that, but.
It's the remote participation in town.
Thank you. And we're gonna find out what the status is of that, and I guess that's something I can do by asking Bill. Bill and I will talk offline on that, and we'll report back to you on that. So those are the parking lot. Is there anything in there that it does not warrant us following up on? Have you put a possibly?
I thought we were having a recorded.
We have a reporter, she is taking it from recording, and that's how we get the minutes.
You've been writing on this.
Why, I was not figuring. But she will be putting that together.
That's what I wanted.
I just want to make sure that in the parking lot that I promised we would have, that I have everything that we got.
I think that's tonight's party.
That's it's tonight. Well, that's all we got for a parking lot so far. And everybody agrees that those are the things we want to make sure we follow up on. So we will definitely do that. I will type that one up. All right, so next meeting is on the 26th of August. Correctly swear. If you cannot attend, please try to attend virtually. If you can't attend virtually, please make sure you listen to the recording, because we will not be going backwards. So if you miss something, it's up to you to play catch up on that, because we want to keep this process moving, so it doesn't take a year and a half. So, yeah. Thank you all for your time.
Your turn.
Anyone wants
Second.
motion to adjourn?
Second.
So moved.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Motion.
I made the first one.
Okay, Nikki made the motion, Bill seconded it, and we unanimous 700 approval. Thank you. Anyone want us to get carried on their sentences?
Hate to get lost.
So,